The sound of gunfire still echoed in Seojin Mong's mind as he stood in his daughter's doorway, watching her rock back and forth in the corner of her bedroom. 6-year-old Arin hadn't spoken since the attack on their mansion 3 months ago. She flinched at every sound, screamed at every touch, and had retreated so far into herself that even the most renowned specialists in Los Angeles had given up. "Mr. Mong," the latest therapist had said just hours earlier, packing her briefcase with obvious relief, "perhaps it's time to consider residential care. Your daughter's trauma response is beyond what we can treat in a home environment. The Willowbrook Institute specializes in cases like hers." Residential care. The words felt like a death sentence. Seojin had built an empire through violence and fear, commanded respect from the most dangerous men in the city, but he couldn't reach his own child. The little girl who used to run into his arms now cowered when he entered a room, her dark eyes wide with terror that cut him deeper than any blade. That's when he heard it, soft piano music drifting from the music room, a melody he hadn't heard in 3 years, not since his wife died. His breath caught as he recognized the lullaby that used to put Arin to sleep every night, the same song that had once filled their home with warmth and love. He moved down the hallway like a man in a trance, his heart hammering against his ribs. When he pushed open the door, the sight that greeted him shattered every wall he'd built around his heart. Naomi Ellis, the quiet black maid he'd hired just weeks ago, sat at the grand piano with gentle fingers dancing across the keys. And there, pressed against her side with her head resting on Naomi's arm, was Arin, calm, peaceful, humming softly along with the melody. For the first time in months, his daughter wasn't afraid. "Welcome to Korean Mafia lovers. Hello everyone. Please let us know where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. Your support is essential for us to continue bringing you these stories." The Mong mansion had been a fortress of silence for 3 months, ever since the night everything changed. Seojin Mong stood at his office window, watching his security team patrol the grounds with military precision. The attack had been swift and brutal. Rival gang members from the Takeda family had breached his home, intent on sending a message about territorial disputes. They'd failed to kill him, but they'd succeeded in destroying something far more precious: his daughter's sense of safety. The mansion itself bore no visible scars from that night. His men had cleaned every trace of blood from the marble floors, replaced the shattered windows, repaired the bullet holes in the walls. But the invisible wounds ran deeper. The house that had once echoed with Arin's laughter now felt like a mausoleum, its 23 rooms filled with nothing but the weight of trauma and regret. Arin had been in her playroom when the gunfire started, surrounded by the toys and books that had once brought her such joy. By the time Seojin's men had eliminated the threat, she was found hiding under her bed, catatonic with terror, her small body rigid with shock. The child who had once filled the mansion with chatter and questions now existed in a world of silence, her autism amplifying every trauma until she could barely function. Dr. Maya Levington, the third child psychologist he'd hired, had lasted exactly 6 days before declaring the case hopeless. "Mr. Mong," she'd said, her professional composure cracking slightly, "I've worked with traumatized children for 15 years, but I've never seen regression this severe. Your daughter has essentially shut down all external communication. Without significant intervention, possibly residential treatment, I'm afraid she may never recover." The words had hit him like physical blows. Seojin had faced down armed enemies, survived assassination attempts, built a criminal empire from nothing. But watching his daughter disappear into herself was a helplessness that threatened to destroy him. "Sir?" Haru Jin, his right-hand man and closest friend, appeared in the doorway. At 35, Haru had been with Seojin for over a decade, managing everything from legitimate business operations to the darker aspects of their organization. His loyalty was absolute, his efficiency legendary, but even he seemed at a loss when it came to Arin's condition. "The new maid has arrived," Haru continued, his voice carefully neutral. "Miss Ellis. The agency said she has experience with special needs children." Seojin nodded without turning around. He'd gone through 6 housekeepers since the attack. The first had quit after Arin's screaming kept her awake for 3 straight nights. The second had lasted until Arin threw a ceramic vase at her head during a particularly violent meltdown. The others had found various excuses to leave, all citing the challenging environment and special circumstances that made their jobs impossible. "Send her in," he said, steeling himself for another disappointment. Naomi Ellis entered with quiet confidence, her posture straight but not rigid. At 28, she carried herself with the dignity of someone who had faced hardship and emerged stronger. Her natural curls were pulled back in a neat bun, and her dark eyes held an intelligence that immediately caught Seojin's attention. She wore a simple black dress that was professional without being severe, and when she moved, it was with a grace that spoke of careful self-control. "Ms. Ellis," he said, finally turning from the window. "I assume the agency explained the situation." "They mentioned your daughter has special needs and has experienced recent trauma," she replied, her voice warm and steady. There was something in her tone, not pity, not fear, but genuine concern, that made him study her more carefully. "My daughter doesn't speak," he said bluntly, watching for her reaction. "She doesn't allow physical contact. She has violent meltdowns that can last for hours. She throws things, breaks furniture, and screams until she loses her voice. The last maid quit after Arin threw a chair at her, and then spent the next 6 hours rocking in a corner." Most people would have made excuses and left at this point. Naomi simply nodded thoughtfully. "Children don't throw chairs without reason," she said. "They communicate their distress the only way they know how. Has anyone tried to understand what she was trying to say?" The response surprised him. In 3 months of consultations with specialists, therapists, and doctors, no one had suggested that Arin's behavior might be communication rather than simply destruction. "You're not concerned about your safety?" he asked. "I'm concerned about hers," Naomi replied without hesitation. "A child in that much pain needs help, not judgment." For the first time in months, Seojin felt something that might have been hope stirring in his chest. "The position requires living on the premises," he said, testing her commitment. "You'll have your own suite in the East Wing. Meals are provided, and you'll have access to the entire house except my private office and the security areas. The salary is generous, but the work is challenging." "What about Miss Arin's schedule, her routines, her preferences?" "She doesn't have any, not anymore." The admission felt like failure. "She used to love music, art, dancing. She would spend hours drawing pictures and making up songs. Now she spends most of her time in her room either completely silent or screaming. We've tried maintaining her old routines, but everything seems to trigger her." Naomi nodded thoughtfully, and he could see her processing the information. "May I meet her?" "She won't come out. She hasn't left her room voluntarily in weeks. When we try to coax her out, she becomes violent." "Then I'll start by cleaning the hallway outside her door," Naomi said simply. "Sometimes presence is enough. Sometimes children need to observe before they can trust." As Seojin watched Naomi gather her supplies and head toward the stairs, he found himself hoping that maybe, finally, someone could reach his daughter. He'd tried everything else: therapists, medications, specialists flown in from around the world. Nothing had worked, but there was something about this woman's calm confidence that made him want to believe in possibilities again. What he didn't know was that Naomi Ellis carried her own secrets and her own pain. She'd grown up with a younger brother on the autism spectrum, had learned to read the subtle signs of sensory overload and emotional distress. She understood that healing happened in whispers, not shouts, and that sometimes the most broken children needed the gentlest touch, and she was about to change everything. The first week passed quietly, but Naomi was always watching, always learning. She moved through the mansion like a gentle ghost, cleaning with careful attention to noise levels, always aware of Arin's presence behind the closed bedroom door. She noticed everything: the way certain sounds made the crying stop abruptly, the times when small feet appeared in the gap under the door, the fact that Arin seemed calmer when Naomi hummed while she worked. She observed that Arin's meltdowns often coincided with specific triggers: the vacuum cleaner's high-pitched whine, the sudden slam of doors, the overlapping conversations of security personnel in the hallways. She began adjusting her cleaning schedule to avoid these triggers, working around Arin's patterns rather than against them. Mrs. Darlene Porter, the elderly head housekeeper who had worked for the Mong family for over a decade, watched Naomi's methods with growing amazement. "In 40 years of domestic work," she told Naomi one afternoon, "I've never seen anyone pay such attention to a child's needs. Most people just want them to behave." "Behavior is communication," Naomi replied, carefully dusting the antique vases in the main hallway. "If we listen carefully enough, children tell us exactly what they need." On the 8th day, Naomi made a discovery that would alter the course of all their lives. She was cleaning the music room, a beautiful space dominated by a concert grand piano that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Dust motes danced in the afternoon sunlight streaming through tall windows as she carefully polished the piano's ebony surface. The room felt sacred somehow, filled with the ghosts of melodies and the memory of happier times. Without thinking, she pressed a single key. The note rang out, pure and clear, cutting through the mansion's perpetual silence like a prayer. From somewhere in the house came the sound of running feet and then silence. Naomi's heart raced as she realized what had happened. Aaron had heard the music and had come to investigate. Slowly, carefully, she pressed another key, then another, building a simple melody. The footsteps returned, closer this time, stopping just outside the music room door. She continued playing, a gentle lullaby her grandmother had taught her years ago when her brother Marcus was having his worst days. The melody was simple but soothing, designed to calm rather than stimulate. Minutes passed in perfect stillness. Then, so quietly she almost missed it, she heard the softest humming from the hallway. Aaron was listening. More than that, she was participating. Over the following days, the breakthrough came in increments so small they were almost invisible. Each afternoon, Naomi would clean the music room and play a few notes on the piano. Each day, Aaron would venture a little closer to the doorway. By the end of the second week, the little girl was sitting in the hallway just outside the room, her back pressed against the wall, humming along with whatever melody Naomi chose. Naomi was careful never to acknowledge Aaron's presence directly, understanding instinctively that the child needed to feel in control of the interaction. Instead, she would play for exactly 20 minutes each day, always ending with the same lullaby, creating a routine that Aaron could depend on. Seojin noticed the change immediately. The screaming had stopped almost entirely. The violent meltdowns had decreased to maybe one every few days, instead of several times daily. Most remarkably, Aaron had begun eating again, not much, but enough that he'd stopped fearing for her physical health. "What are you doing differently?" he asked Naomi one evening as she prepared to leave for the day. They were standing in the kitchen, and he was struck by how naturally she moved through his space, how her presence seemed to calm the entire atmosphere of the house. She was preparing Aaron's dinner, simple foods that wouldn't overwhelm sensitive taste buds, and he found himself watching the careful way she arranged everything on the plate. "I'm listening to her," Naomi said, wiping down the counter with practiced efficiency. "She tells me what she needs, just not with words. I don't understand." Naomi paused, considering her words carefully. She could see the exhaustion in his face, the weight of months of helplessness and fear. This man who commanded respect from dangerous criminals was completely lost when it came to his own daughter's needs. "Your daughter has a beautiful mind, Mr. Mong," she said gently. "It just processes the world differently than most people's. When she covers her ears, she's telling me the sound is too loud or the wrong frequency. When she rocks, she's self-regulating, trying to manage overwhelming sensory input. When she hums, she's finding comfort in predictable patterns and rhythms." The doctors said she was regressing, that the trauma had made her autism worse. "The doctors see symptoms," Naomi interrupted softly. "I see a little girl who's trying to feel safe again. Everything she's doing makes perfect sense when you understand what she's experiencing." Something in her voice made his chest tighten. There was knowledge there, hard-won understanding that went beyond professional training. "You speak like you understand from personal experience." "I do." She met his eyes directly, and he saw both strength and vulnerability in her gaze. "My younger brother Marcus is autistic. I learned early that love isn't about forcing someone to be different. It's about accepting who they are and meeting them where they are." The honesty in her words hit him like a physical blow. For months he'd been trying to get Aaron back to who she was before the attack, focusing on what she'd lost rather than who she was becoming. Naomi was helping her navigate her new reality instead of fighting against it. "Show me," he said quietly, the words coming out rougher than he'd intended. "Show you what?" "How to listen to her. How to help her the way you do." Naomi studied his face, seeing past the powerful exterior to the desperate father underneath. Here was a man who would kill to protect his daughter, but didn't know how to simply sit with her in her pain. "Tomorrow evening," she said, "after dinner, come to the music room, but you have to promise me something." "What?" No expectations, no agenda, just presence. Can you do that? He nodded. Though the concept felt foreign to someone who had built his life on control and decisive action. The next night, Seojin approached the music room with the same nervous energy he'd once reserved for hostile takeovers. Through the doorway, he could see Naomi seated at the piano, her fingers moving over the keys with gentle precision. And there, sitting on a small cushion beside the piano bench, was Arin. His daughter looked peaceful in a way he hadn't seen since before her mother died. Her small hands were folded in her lap, and she was humming along with the melody, a lullaby he recognized with a sharp pang of grief. It was the same song his wife had played every night, the melody that had once been the soundtrack to their family's happiness. Naomi noticed him immediately but didn't stop playing. Instead, she shifted slightly on the bench, making space. The invitation was clear, but she left the choice entirely up to him. Seojin entered the room as quietly as possible, his heart hammering against his ribs. To his amazement, Arin didn't startle or run. She simply glanced at him, the first direct eye contact they'd shared in months, and continued humming. He sat beside Naomi on the piano bench, acutely aware of her warmth, the subtle scent of her perfume, the way her shoulder brushed his as she played. For several minutes none of them spoke. They just existed in the music, connected by something deeper than words. When the song ended, Arin looked up at her father for the first time in months. "Ioma's song," she whispered, her voice rusty from disuse but clear. Seojin's breath caught in his throat. "Yes, baby. Ioma's song." "Naomi plays it better," Arin said matter-of-factly, then climbed onto Naomi's lap with the casual trust of a child who felt completely safe. Watching his daughter curl up against this woman who had appeared in their lives like an answered prayer, Seojin felt something shift in his chest. It wasn't just gratitude, though. That was part of it. It was something deeper, more dangerous, more real than anything he'd ever experienced. It was the beginning of love. "How did you know that song?" he asked Naomi quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "I found the sheet music in the piano bench," she replied, her arms gentle around Arin. "I thought it might be familiar to her. Music often holds memories more strongly than anything else, especially for children on the spectrum. My wife played it every night," he said, the words coming out in a rush. "From the time Arin was born until she got sick. And then the music stopped, and I never thought to—" He couldn't finish the sentence, overwhelmed by the realization of how much his daughter had lost. "Until she got sick," Arin finished for him, her voice small but clear. And then the music stopped, and everything got quiet and scary. The simple statement broke something open in Seojin's chest. He'd been so focused on his own grief, on protecting Arin from the world's dangers, that he'd never considered how the absence of music had affected his daughter. Music had been her mother's language of love, and when it disappeared, Arin had lost more than just melodies. She'd lost a crucial form of communication and comfort. "Would you like me to teach you?" Naomi asked softly, looking between father and daughter. "So you can play for her, so the music can come back to your house." The offer was so unexpected, so generous, that for a moment he couldn't speak. "I don't know how to play piano. I've never. My hands aren't made for gentle things." Naomi looked at his hands, strong, scarred from years of violence, marked with small tattoos that told stories he'd never shared with anyone. "I can teach you," she said simply. "If you want to learn, music isn't about having perfect hands, it's about having an open heart." Looking at his daughter, peaceful and content in Naomi's arms, Seojin realized he would learn anything, do anything, to keep this moment alive. "Yes," he said, "please, teach me." The piano lessons began the following week, and Seojin discovered that learning music required a kind of vulnerability he'd never experienced. His hands, so skilled at violence and control, fumbled over the keys like a child's, but Naomi was endlessly patient, guiding his fingers with gentle touches that sent electricity racing through his veins. "Feel the rhythm first," she would say, placing her hand over his to demonstrate the proper pressure and timing. "Music is about connection, not perfection. Your daughter doesn't need you to be a concert pianist. She just needs you to try." Arin became their enthusiastic audience, clapping when her father managed a simple melody and offering encouragement in her soft, careful voice. She'd begun speaking more each day, though still primarily to Naomi. With Seojin she was cautious but no longer afraid, and he treasured every word she offered him. "Appa is getting better," she announced one evening after he'd successfully played through a simple children's song without making a mistake. "He's a very good student," Naomi agreed, and the pride in her voice made Seojin's chest warm, with something he'd almost forgotten how to feel. These evening sessions became the highlight of his days. After years of living in a world of violence and betrayal, the music room felt like sanctuary. Here, he could be just a father learning to connect with his daughter, guided by a woman whose presence had become as essential as breathing. But their peaceful routine was shattered on a Tuesday night in November. Seojin was working late in his office, reviewing reports from his legitimate businesses, the restaurants and import companies that served as fronts for his less legal enterprises, when Haru burst in without knocking. "Sir, we have a problem," Haru said, his usual calm completely shattered. "Detective Mendoza is here with a warrant and a full SWAT team." Seojin's blood ran cold. Ray Mendoza was one of the few honest cops in the LAPD, which made him infinitely more dangerous than the corrupt ones Seojin usually dealt with. "What kind of warrant?" "Search warrant for the entire property. Someone tipped them off about the weapons cache in the east basement." Haru's face was grim. "They know about the money laundering operation too. This isn't a fishing expedition. They have specific information." The east basement was directly below Naomi and Aaron's rooms. If the police found the weapons, there would be arrests, trials, media attention. Everything he'd worked to keep away from his daughter would come crashing down around them. "Get Naomi and Aaron out of the house," he ordered, already reaching for his phone to call his lawyer. "Take them to the safe house in Malibu now." "Sir, there's no time." The front door exploded inward as SWAT officers flooded the mansion, their tactical gear and weapons turning his home into a war zone. Seojin heard shouting, heavy footsteps, and then the sound that made his heart stop completely, Aaron screaming. He ran toward the sound, Haru close behind, finding chaos in the main hallway. Officers were everywhere, their tactical gear and weapons creating a sensory nightmare for a child with autism. And in the middle of it all, Aaron was having a complete meltdown, her screams echoing off the walls as she rocked violently on the floor, her hands pressed over her ears. "Don't touch her." Naomi was shouting at an officer who was trying to approach the child. "She's autistic. You're making it worse. The noise, the lights. You're overwhelming her system." "Ma'am, step away from the child," the officer commanded, his hand moving to his weapon. "I'm not leaving her." Naomi dropped to her knees beside Aaron, not touching but creating a barrier with her body. She began humming, the same lullaby she played every night, trying to cut through the chaos with familiar sound. Seojin pushed through the crowd of officers, his hands raised to show he wasn't armed. "That's my daughter," he said, his voice carrying the authority that had once commanded a criminal empire. "Please let me help her." "Seojin Mong, you're under arrest," Detective Mendoza announced, stepping forward with handcuffs gleaming in the harsh tactical lighting. "Appa!" Aaron's scream was heartbreaking, raw with terror and confusion. She tried to run to him but stumbled, overwhelmed by the sensory assault of lights, sounds, and strangers. "It's okay, baby," Seojin called to her, even as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. "Naomi will take care of you. I'll come back to you. I promise." "No," Aaron sobbed, her small body shaking with the force of her distress. "Don't take Appa. Don't take him away." The sound of his daughter's anguish was worse than any physical torture Seojin had ever endured. As the officers led him away, his last image was of Naomi gathering Aaron into her arms, whispering comfort while his daughter's world collapsed around her once again. In the holding cell hours later, Seojin stared at the concrete walls and realized that everything he'd built, everything he'd fought for, meant nothing if he couldn't protect the two people who mattered most. He had to find a way back to them. He had to find a way to make this right. The arrest made headlines across Los Angeles within hours. Korean Mafia boss taken down in dramatic raid. The photos showed Seojin in handcuffs, his mansion surrounded by police cars, and speculation about his criminal empire filled every news channel and social media platform. The story had everything the media loved: violence, money, power, and the fall of a man who had seemed untouchable. But the media attention was nothing compared to the devastation at home. Aaron had regressed completely, retreating even further than she had after the original attack. She stopped speaking again, stopped eating, and spent her days huddled in the music room, rocking back and forth while Naomi played the same lullaby over and over. The little girl who had been slowly healing was now broken all over again, her fragile progress shattered by another traumatic separation. "She keeps asking when Appa is coming home," Naomi told Haru during one of his visits to check on them. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her voice was hoarse from singing lullabies and whispering comfort. "I don't know what to tell her. I don't know how to explain that he might not come back." "The lawyers are working on bail," Haru said, his usually composed demeanor cracked with worry. He'd been with Seojin for over a decade, had seen him survive assassination attempts and hostile takeovers, but this felt different, more final. "But the charges are serious. Weapons trafficking, money laundering, racketeering, conspiracy. Even if he gets out, the trial could take years." Naomi felt her heart sink like a stone. She'd grown to care deeply for this family, but more than that. She'd fallen in love with the man who sat beside her at the piano each night, learning to be gentle for his daughter's sake. The thought of him locked away, of Arin growing up without her father, was unbearable. "There's something else," Haru continued reluctantly, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Child Services has been asking questions. With Seojin in custody and the media attention, they're concerned about Arin's care situation." "She's fine with me," Naomi said fiercely, her protective instincts flaring. "I'm taking excellent care of her. She's safe, she's fed, she's loved." "You're not family," Haru interrupted gently. "And with the media attention, with questions about the household's stability." His expression was grim. "They might try to place her in foster care, temporarily, they say, until the situation is resolved." The words hit Naomi like a physical blow, stealing the breath from her lungs. Arin, with her special needs and trauma history, placed with strangers who wouldn't understand her unique communication style or her specific triggers? It would destroy her completely. "Over my dead body," Naomi whispered, her voice carrying a steel that surprised them both. That night, as she sat with Arin in the music room, Naomi made a decision that would change everything. She pulled out her phone and dialed the number she'd memorized but never used. The direct line Detective Mendoza had left with his card. "Detective Mendoza, this is Naomi Ellis. I work for the Mong family. I need to speak with you about Seojin Mong and his daughter." The meeting took place the next morning at a coffee shop downtown, far from the media circus surrounding the mansion. Detective Mendoza was a middle-aged Latino man with kind eyes and a reputation for integrity that made him both respected and feared in equal measure. He'd built his career on taking down criminals who thought they were above the law, but he was also known for his fairness and his genuine concern for victims. "Ms. Ellis," he said, sliding into the booth across from her, "I understand you work for Mr. Mong. I have to warn you that anything you tell me could be used in his prosecution." "I understand," Naomi replied, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup for warmth. "But I need you to understand something about that family first." "I'm listening." Naomi took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "Seojin Mong may be a criminal, but he's also a father who loves his daughter more than life itself. That little girl has been through trauma that would break most adults. She's autistic, she's lost her mother, and now she's lost her father too. If you put him away for years, if you let Child Services take her away from the only stability she has left, you'll be destroying an innocent child." "Miss Ellis, I appreciate your concern for the child, but—" "I'm not finished," Naomi interrupted, her voice steady but fierce. "I know you have children, Detective. I know you're a good man trying to do the right thing. But sometimes the right thing isn't what the law says it should be. Sometimes it's about protecting the innocent, even when the situation is complicated." Mendoza studied her carefully, seeing the desperation beneath her composed exterior. "What are you asking me to do? Let a dangerous criminal walk free? Give him a chance to change. He's already started, for her. He's been learning to be the father she needs, learning to communicate with her, learning to put her needs above everything else. Don't take that away from her." "He's a dangerous man, Ms. Ellis. His organization has been responsible for violence, drug trafficking, extortion." "Not to her," Naomi said firmly. "Never to her, and not to me. I've lived in that house for months, and I've seen who he really is when he thinks no one is watching. He's gentle with her, patient, loving. He's trying to be better." The detective was quiet for a long moment, considering her words. What exactly are you proposing? I'll make you a deal, Naomi said, leaning forward. I'll testify about everything I've seen in that house, the weapons, the meetings, the business dealings. I'll help you build your case against his organization, but in exchange you help me save that little girl's family. What kind of help are you talking about? Plea bargain, house arrest instead of prison, community service, supervised probation, something that keeps him with his daughter while ensuring he can't return to his old life. Mendoza's eyebrows rose. You're asking me to essentially let him off easy in exchange for his cooperation. I'm asking you to consider that sometimes justice isn't about punishment. It's about rehabilitation. It's about giving people a chance to choose a different path. And why would you risk everything for them? You could be charged as an accessory, you know. Your testimony could implicate you in his crimes. Naomi's eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back for days. Because they're my family now too. Because that little girl deserves to grow up with her father. Because I've seen what love can do to change a person. And I believe he can be better than what he was. 3 days later, Seojin was released on bail pending a plea hearing. When he walked through the front door of his mansion, Arin launched herself into his arms with a force that nearly knocked him over. Appa, you came back. I'll always come back to you, baby, he whispered, holding her tight, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. Always. Over her head, his eyes met Naomi's, and he saw something there that made his breath catch. Love. Not just for Arin, but for him. Real, deep, unconditional love that he'd never thought he deserved. Thank you, he said quietly, the words carrying the weight of everything he couldn't say in front of his daughter. Don't thank me yet, she replied, her expression serious. We need to talk. The conversation took place that night in the music room, after Arin had finally fallen asleep. Naomi sat at the piano, her fingers absently picking out a melody, while Seojin paced like a caged animal, his usual composure completely shattered. You made a deal with the police, he said. It wasn't a question. I made a deal to save your family. By betraying me. His voice was flat, emotionless, but she could see the hurt in his eyes. Naomi's hands stilled on the keys. By saving you from yourself. You don't understand what you've done, he said, his voice rising slightly. My organization, my reputation, the respect I've built over 15 years. Your daughter almost went into foster care. Naomi stood, her eyes blazing with an anger that surprised them both. While you were locked up, Child Services was preparing to take her away from me, away from everything familiar. She stopped eating again, stopped speaking. She was dying inside, and you're worried about your reputation. The words hit him like physical slaps, each one driving home the reality of what his choices had cost. I was trying to protect her, by being someone she could lose at any moment, by living a life that meant she could never feel truly safe. Naomi stepped closer, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper. She needs her father, Seojin, not the Mafia boss, not the criminal, her father. And what about what I need? The question tore from his throat, raw and desperate. This life, this organization, it's all I know, it's all I am. Without it, I'm nothing. No, it's not. Naomi reached up and cupped his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. I've seen who you really are. In this room with her, with me, you're gentle, you're patient. You're capable of so much more than violence and fear. You're asking me to give up everything. I'm asking you to choose everything that matters. They stared at each other in the dim light of the music room. The weight of the decision hanging between them like a bridge, neither was sure they could cross. Seojin could feel his old life calling to him. The power, the respect, the fear that had defined him for so long. But he could also feel something else. The warmth of Naomi's hands on his face, the memory of Arin's laughter, the possibility of a different kind of strength. The plea deal, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. What are the terms? 5 years house arrest, complete dissolution of your criminal organization, all assets turned over except this house and enough money to live comfortably, regular check-ins with probation officers, community service working with at-risk youth. She hesitated, then continued. And mandatory therapy for both you and Arin, to deal with the trauma, the transition. He closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the choice pressing down on him like a physical force. If I agree to this, I'll have enemies, people who see my cooperation as betrayal. We might never be completely safe. We'll be safer than we are now, and we'll be together. The word we hung in the air between them, full of promise and possibility and hope. Why? He asked quietly, opening his eyes to meet hers. Why are you willing to risk everything for us? Naomi's eyes filled with tears that caught the lamplight like diamonds. Because I love you. Both of you. Because this family saved me as much as I saved it. Because I want to spend the rest of my life sitting at this piano with you and watching Arin grow up happy and safe and loved. Seojin felt something break open in his chest. Not the violent shattering he was used to, but something gentle and healing, like ice melting in spring. I love you too, he whispered. I didn't know I was capable of it until you showed me how. When he kissed her, it tasted like redemption, like coming home, like the first note of a song that would last the rest of their lives. The plea hearing took place 2 weeks later, in a courtroom packed with media and spectators. Seojin stood before Judge Patricia Hawkins and formally dissolved his criminal empire, turning over evidence that would put dozens of dangerous men behind bars. In exchange, he received 5 years of house arrest and the chance to rebuild his life from the ground up. The transition wasn't easy. Former associates saw his cooperation as the ultimate betrayal, and there were threats, attempts at retaliation. But Seojin's security team, now focused on protection rather than offense, kept them safe. And slowly, gradually, the family began to heal. Arin thrived under the new stability. With both her father and Naomi present every day, she blossomed like a flower finally given enough sunlight. Her speech returned, stronger than before. She began attending a special school for children with autism, making friends for the first time. And every evening the three of them would gather in the music room, where Seojin continued his piano lessons, and Arin would sing along with her pure, clear voice. "Play the wedding song," Arin demanded one evening 6 months later, clapping her hands with excitement. "What wedding song?" Naomi laughed, though her cheeks flushed pink. "The one you and Appa will play when you get married." Seojin and Naomi exchanged glances over the little girl's head. They hadn't talked about marriage, though the love between them had only grown stronger as the months passed and their new life took shape. "What makes you think we're getting married?" Seojin asked his daughter, though his heart was already racing. "Because you love each other," Arin said matter-of-factly, "and because I want Naomi to be my real Ioma, not just my friend Ioma." Naomi's eyes filled with tears. "Oh, sweetheart. Will you?" Seojin asked suddenly, dropping to one knee beside the piano bench. "Will you marry us? Will you be her mother and my wife, and make this family complete?" "Yes," Naomi whispered, then louder, "Yes!" Arin squealed with delight and threw her arms around both of them. "Now we're a real family." As they held each other in the music room where their love had begun, Seojin realized that he'd finally found what he'd been searching for his entire life. Not power or fear or respect, but something infinitely more precious. He'd found home. Years later, the music room had become the heart of their home in ways Seojin never could have imagined. The walls were covered with Arin's artwork, bright, beautiful paintings that showed a mind no longer trapped by trauma, but freed by love and understanding. The piano bench had been replaced with a longer one to accommodate their growing family, and the room echoed with laughter and music every single day. Arin, now 12, was an accomplished pianist in her own right, her autism channeled into an extraordinary musical gift that brought joy to everyone who heard her play. She performed regularly at school concerts, her confidence blooming under the steady support of parents who understood and celebrated her unique way of seeing the world. "Ioma, Appa, come listen," she called one evening, her fingers dancing over the keys in a complex piece she'd been practicing for weeks. Seojin and Naomi entered the music room hand in hand, their wedding rings catching the light. Behind them toddled 2-year-old Jin, their son who had inherited his father's determination and his mother's gentle spirit, along with his sister's love of music. "That's beautiful, sweetheart," Naomi said, settling beside Arin on the bench, while Seojin lifted Jin onto his lap. "I wrote it for our family," Arin announced proudly. "It's called The Song That Brought Us Together." As she played, Seojin thought about the journey that had brought them here. The violence and fear of his old life seemed like a distant nightmare now, something that had happened to a different person entirely. He'd built a new empire, one based on love instead of power, healing instead of harm. His legitimate businesses thrived, providing security for his family while allowing him to give back to the community he'd once terrorized. The house arrest had ended 3 years ago, but he rarely left the mansion except for family outings or business meetings. Why would he want to be anywhere else when everything he loved was here? "Appa," Arin said when the song ended, "do you remember when you first heard Ioma playing piano?" "I remember," he said softly. "It was the night everything changed." "The night you found us," Naomi added, squeezing his hand. "The night you saved us," he corrected. "Both of us." Arin smiled, the expression bright and unguarded, in a way that still took his breath away after all these years. "I think we all saved each other." As the evening light faded outside the windows, the family gathered around the piano for their nightly ritual. Arin played, Naomi sang, Seojin added his deeper voice to the harmony, and little Jin clapped along with infectious joy. The Mafia boss who had